Please welcome Peter Fishman, co-founder at Mozart Data. Peter will introduce us to reducing toil with ELT and BI. We'll take a 20-minute break after Peter's session and be back at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific for a hands-on workshop led by me, where you'll learn to build your own data observability solution on Snowflake in minutes. We're excited to see you all there. Earlier today, you would have gotten an email with any pre-work steps that you needed for the workshop. If you have your own Snowflake environment, you can feel free to follow along in there. Otherwise, you'll be able to log in into our demo environment and go through all the steps using our Snowflake instance. Thank you so much for being here with us, and take it away, Peter.
Hi, I'm Pete Fishman. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Mozart Data. We're the easiest way to spin up a modern data stack. Today, I'll be talking about reducing toil with ELT, BI, and the Philadelphia Eagles. So I've been invited to talk on this track, Reducing Toil. Toil is Google's chosen word for the human work needed to operate your system. So instantly when I got invited to the talk, I thought about high school English, and I thought about Macbeth, and I thought about double, double, toil, and trouble. So I've got a Shakespearean agenda for us. It's set in 5 acts. I'll first be making predictions like the witches. I'll be ending with an epilogue. And in the middle, I'll talk about sort of how toil gets created and how it gets reduced. So a bold prediction from the 1970s, sort of similar to Moore's law, was that a paperless office would occur thanks to computing advances. And by the 90s, paper would be obsolete. And of course, this prediction not only didn't come true, paper consumption actually more than doubled over this period. And a lot of what I think about of the promise of the modern data stack will sort of yield a similar type prediction. So the modern data stack is aimed at reducing toil, is aimed at reducing busy work for data engineers. And instead, what I'm going to argue is that it will in fact solve low-value toil, but it will in fact create more high-value toil. So another prediction that I'm going to make is that in organizations, there will be people that create toil and know how to solve toil, and they'll base their entire job around, sort of being the person that does the toil. So this is a reference, this slide is a reference to one of my favorite shows from the 2000s, Lost. So in Lost, somebody had to push a button every 108 minutes. And in fact, a lot of people derive a lot of maybe job security or satisfaction knowing that they're the only ones that can do the toil. And this is something that really deeply needs to be avoided. You don't want to create toil for toil's sake. So what is the modern data stack? How should we think about the modern data stack? So the way that we think about the modern data stack at Mozart Data is that you've got tools that generate data, SAS tools, databases, CSV files. That data then gets extracted and loaded into a cloud data warehouse. That data then gets transformed, and ultimately it's usable downstream in BI tools, reverse ETL tools. Now, the transform layer is, of course, much broader than just, if I think about T today, it is much broader than just transforms. Now you see a variety of sort of solutions that help essentially teams use their data. Catalogs, observability, governance. So, the modern data stack is richer than this. What we focus on at Mozart is sort of the back 4 pieces. And in thinking about sort of the toil of the modern data stack, I'm going to work from right to left. So this is a picture from 2011. So I get to relive some of my career. This is taken a screenshot from one of our key North Star metrics at Yammer. So Yammer was an enterprise social network, and active users was our main metric, although here it says engaged users. And the red line represents engaged users. And what you can see is that Yammer's activity is very day of week cyclical. So it gets used on weekdays and not on weekends. And what you can also see is that the first Monday in September in 2011, Yammer's sort of engaged users dips. And this is really unsurprising because, um, of course, it was Labor Day. In fact, nobody really looked into it. Nobody tried to solve what was going on. It was quite obvious what was going on. But occasionally you get really obscure holidays. Yammer was very big in the Netherlands. There's a Dutch holiday, Koninginnedag, which is King Day, which would also kind of like skew the metrics, and it would lead to us cutting engaged users in a variety of ad hoc ways to figure out whether this was a problem. By problem, I mean not a problem, just sort of an artifact of a holiday, or whether it was an actual issue with our service. The point here is that this is a BI tool. This is actually a BI tool called Avocado that we used at Yammer, which was a predecessor to Mode Analytics. This BI tool removed Toil. So nobody had to write a query every 5 minutes, say, okay, how many active users did I have? Um, the it wasn't sort of on a data analyst to constantly monitor and see, okay, do we have the number of users we expect or do we not? In fact, anyone could look at this chart and notice if there was an issue with one of our key metrics. So in that sense, it removed Toil. But it actually did something of the opposite. It actually created more Toil. So our analytics team turned into more of a deli counter than an analytics team. And by that, I mean there was effectively a never ending stream of requests and asks about the data and how to cut the data. And we found ourselves, while we removed ourselves from the toil of, the basic question of, how many users do we have today? We, in fact, created more and higher value toil. So on the one hand, that BI tool moved uh, the the sort of operational work to the operators of the business. So move the low value toil to a different cost center. But at the same time, it created more high value toil challenges in ways in which we had to cut our data. And I think that that's actually the real goal of any data team. It's to remove low value toil and then essentially again free up the data scientists, the data engineers, the data analysts to go answer more high value questions. This is another screenshot from a talk that I gave in 2015. This was a picture of our data platform at Zenefits. So where's the toil on this slide? The answer is there's a lot of red arrows. And the red arrows are all scripts that move data from one place to another. And what you have is a lot of work for a data engineering team. And there's immediate work, which is writing and executing those scripts. And then there's sort of subsequent work, which is maintenance. So as schemas change in, say, SaaS tools, you have to then update that work. One of the things that I've added to this slide that wasn't there in 2015 is a really great logo. So if you look at the line that goes from Salesforce to our data warehouse, you'll notice the Fivetran logo. So this was actually Fivetran's first connector. It was for Zenefits moving data from Salesforce to Redshift. And I do that with pride. Today, this picture would look like a lot of Fivetran logos. So what Fivetran did was remove effectively the toil of a rote solved problem, moving data from a very standard SaaS tool like Salesforce to a commonly used data warehouse. And today, like I mentioned, these red arrows would be solved by Fivetran, companies that also do EL, like Mozart Data, or companies that do reverse ETL, those sort of arrows that go from the warehouse to different places. So what you see is an initial look at what a modern data platform looks like, though it was 7 years ago. And the pieces are starting to come together. But what you'll notice is that there's a lot of work for the data engineering team. And slowly over time, that work has been replaced by services, solving essentially the toil of their work so that they can go take on greater and greater challenges. So, from this same talk in 2016, I have, sort of the advice: do data modeling. So, you could imagine the toil of a data analyst. That data analyst writing a bunch of complicated subqueries or CTEs in order to get basic answers out of their data. Instead, these sort of raw tables need to be cleaned and manipulated so that they're, one, human consumable, and two, you're able to work with summaries. So you get a lot of power out of your dimension tables, and most of our answers, came from again, these summary tables. So what we did at Zenefits was to build tooling that enabled the data analyst. So moving that work of data modeling from the data engineer to the data analyst that was a little bit closer to that business problem, with just SQL to be able to create these sort of summary tables. And a lot of the tooling that you see in the T space, and it's certainly a mantra at Mozart Data and of say DBT, is to write SQL, get table. And there's no sort of necessarily snippets of code needed. What you want is to essentially move that sort of rote work from the data engineer to the data analyst. And a lot of the promise of the T space is, again, to remove some of these necessary but mundane steps. So what we have here is a screenshot of Mozart, and again, the principle here is by knowing just SQL, you can do anything in terms of creating data pipelines. In fact, our scheduling is done with an intuitive UI, effectively some blue buttons. And what we've done in doing this is moved this work again from data engineers and data scientists all the way to operators that are data savvy and sort of can write some SQL. Also going back in time in 2011, DJ Patil, who was running then data science at LinkedIn, said that a challenge for any data team is to for any data hire is to knock the socks off the company, and to do so in their first 90 days. And the premise here is that if you're able to knock the socks off the company in the first 90 days, you're then granted sort of a longer leash, and you sort of gain trust and you enter this virtuous cycle. This cycle where it's trusted that your work and your toil is going to yield something really valuable, and as a result, of having that extra leash, you're actually able to create that value. And that value gives you an even longer leash. And again, you get this sort of virtuous cycle. So a real challenge for an individual is to knock the socks off the company in their first 90 days. And that sets their career up at LinkedIn for success. One of his more subtle points is that it's important to understand that in doing something mind blowing in 90 days, it's as much a team goal as it is an individual goal. He's sort of hinting at toil. If toil gets in the way of individuals getting into this virtuous cycle, you failed as a team. So it is incumbent on the team that an individual can walk in and doesn't need a month to spin up and understand essentially the data, because you're sort of that window for creating something valuable, for knocking the socks off the company, is shrinking, and it's in fact a team goal to minimize that toil. So now I want to go all the way back in my career. So in 2008, after grad school, my first job was that I was at the Philadelphia Eagles, of course, not as a player, as a statistician. And I was in part responsible for creating their first 2 point chart. So, what a 2 point chart is that when a team scores a touchdown in football, they have a choice of going for one or going for two. And this, for the most part, is a straightforward mathematical problem. And what we wanted to do was remove Andy Reid's toil. So we don't want him right after the touchdown when everybody's celebrating, calling up to the booth and saying, okay, do I go for one or two? And we certainly don't want him doing dynamic programming in his head, following the touchdown. In fact, what we want to do is leverage BI to ensure that he's going to make good decisions, to make it very consumable. Uh, in fact, in this case, the BI tool was like Excel plus a laminated card. So not very heavy BI tools, but BI tools are there to essentially um, eliminate effectively the fetching of data in a complex way. So in this case, we've provided Andy a good guide as to when to go for one, when to go for two, and it's presented in not just a human readable, but also a very consumable and action oriented way. And in doing so, you're removing some of the sort of repetitive task of figuring out in a very specific context when to go for one or when to go for two. So, in true Shakespearean tragedy, the NFC Championship was won by the Cardinals, and part of that outcome was determined by a bad decision about whether to go for one or two in the third quarter. So, we're going to end this particular talk on some sense a tragic note. But I want to also highlight that um, I've seen the future with respect to the modern data stack, and it's the past. So, a number of really great teams and have built these solutions in the past. They've tried to solve toil in the past. And what the modern data stack is simply a slicker reimagining of the solutions that those teams really ached for. Basically, they were holding on to incredible product market fit and trying to solve new problems. And in doing so, they created their solutions, many of which are commercialized as the modern data stack today. So in thinking about the ways in which we will be solving toil going forward, it will in fact look so much like the way that we've solved it in the past. The solutions are going to be, better designed. They are going to solve, more solutions. In the example that I gave at Zenefits, Fivetran, removed the data engineer from moving data from Salesforce to Redshift. Today, Fivetran has hundreds of connectors to multiple data warehouses. So these solutions will, proliferate and also broaden. The thing that is a little bit counterintuitive is that in solving toil, you do not remove toil. In the same way that the paperless office never came to be, by solving the problems that data engineers face, they aren't eliminated from a job. So we don't want you to have the lost mentality of I need to take job security by doing a specific task that only I can do. Because that ultimately is a true tax on an organization moving quickly. Solving problems wins the prize of getting to solve more problems, but also getting to solve better problems, more interesting problems. If I look at the types of challenges that teams are tackling today from a data perspective, they're wildly more interesting than the repeated counts and sums that I've solved personally over the last decade. And last, I sort of want to end on a note of Life is a journey, not a destination, a quote from Emerson. But I think the same applies to data engineering teams. So on the one hand, this work is challenging, and then it becomes solved, and then it becomes rote, and then it becomes annoying. But actually, take a lot of pride in essentially moving complex problems downstream to different cost centers. Take a lot of pride in automating much of that work. Be able to make smart trade-offs about when to invest in a solution as you see that problem coming up more and more often. And appreciate effectively the journey of solving these problems. It's really amazing to think about a lot of the things that I myself and my teams have overcome over the last 10 years. But now seeing the beautiful, more advanced next generation of them in the modern data stack is also really rewarding. So enjoy the journey to the extent that you can. It's about the journey, not the destination. Thank you. Any questions?